Hello and welcome to Fight News Now Extra. My name is John Pollock and we've got lots of news coming your way with John Ramdine and Robin Black. And today we are discussing the numbers that have come in for Bellator's Dynamite card. The promotion has announced a new lightweight bout for November, and a huge article from Deadspin highlights issues surrounding a fight from 2012. Josh Gross has uncovered a lot of information regarding Vitor Belfort and tests he was subjected to in an article with Deadspin. This was ahead of Belfort's short notice fight with John Jones in September of 2012 in Toronto at UFC 152. Through an accidental email leak by someone in the UFC, a handful of people in the industry were mistakenly provided with Belfort's testing record at the time and later warned by UFC's legal team to delete the email. The key results in the test, which was taken September 1st of 2012, saw Belfort's testosterone level at 1,038 nanograms of testosterone per deciliter, which is high but is within range of someone that is allowed to be on TRT. His picogram level was at 47.7 picograms per milliliter, well above the range of 8.7 to 25.1. The piece also states that it was the UFC that gave Belfort the TRT exemption and not the Ontario Athletic Commission, who oversaw the event in Toronto. Bellator has announced that former lightweight champion Michael Chandler will take on David Rickles on November the 6th at the Bellator 145 card in St. Louis, Missouri on Spike TV. Following 3 straight losses, Chandler bounced back with a submission over Derek Campos this past June, while Rickles was on the verge of finishing John Alessio in his last bout when he connected with an illegal knee and the fight was ruled a no contest. And the television numbers are in for Bellator's Dynamite card this past weekend and did not reflect the same success they had at the Gate in San Jose this past Saturday. The near 4-hour broadcast on Spike averaged 800,000 viewers, well below the figure of 1,580,000 that tuned in for the Kimbo Slice Ken Shamrock card this past June. The peak viewership came during the Muhammad King Mo Lawal Linton Vassell fight, which averaged 930,000 viewers for the light heavyweight tournament fight. This coming Saturday night, tune in at 7 p.m. Eastern Time as John Ramdine, Robin Black, and myself will be with you for a full hour heading into the UFC's return to Japan, previewing the Josh Barnett-Roy Nelson fight and the entire main card. The prelim action from the Saitama Super Arena, that will be coming up here exclusively in Canada on Fight Network at 8 p.m. Eastern Time with 4 fights. We are here with John Ramdine and Robin Black. Off the top, Josh Gross has uncovered a lot of information from, first of all, just the process of how this became public was a paralegal at the UFC in 2012 was sending out Vitor Belfort's test results to 3 executives in the UFC, mistakenly sent it to just a handful of people in the industry, fighters, managers, and then threatening, if anybody uses this, we will come after you. I don't know how that would have necessarily held up in court, the idea that this guy might have questionable levels and we're sending him into a cage fight. Nonetheless, here we are 3 years later and this information has come out, and the levels, I mean, you can look at it. His testosterone level, it was certainly high, but not bizarre or crazy for a guy that might have been on TRT. But now there's a new term in the vernacular when it comes to this. It's picogram levels, and his picogram levels were exceedingly high. So I don't know what we can glean from this, other than this did happen in our own backyard in Ontario, and the Ontario Athletic Commission, they had no knowledge of a TUE being issued to Belfort. It was apparently done just by the UFC.
Nick Diaz tried to pick a gram, and they suspended him for 5 years for it. Yeah, I don't know, man.
I really planted that one for
What are you going to do? There's nothing you can do. You're not like, this happened a while ago. Like, they're still trying to sort things out. The UFC and the rest of the sport is doing their best to try to get clean.
Could the UFC not listen? And I understand maybe Deadspin is not their ideal outlet here, but for the UFC to not even issue a statement, they wouldn't provide anything for it. It really does come across like you just don't want to address anything. Whereas I feel if the UFC were to say, listen, 2012 might have been 3 years ago, but in this age of TRT, that was almost the Wild West at this point 3 years ago. We really were behind the ball when it came to issuing testosterone replacement therapy to guys, and it's something that we have now eradicated for the most part with USADA being brought in. I think the UFC could have very much put out a statement and moved on from this. Instead, you don't respond to an article like this. You don't give your side of things. The public is going to go with the information that's out there, and it isn't all that positive towards the UFC.
True, but I'm sure the UFC, they've dealt with this the entire time with people saying, oh, this person's on performance enhancers and so on and so forth. They've dealt with the situation. Like, what else do you want us to do? We are trying to make the sport clean. We're doing more testing.
You're saying all this, but they said nothing.
I understand.
You're doing a better job.
I get that, but the UFC, there's like, why do we need to say stuff? The proof is in the pudding. Look what we're doing. We are doing our best to change the sport. We don't need to talk about it. People have pointed the fingers at us for years and years and years. We put our money where our mouths are, and now the sport hopefully is going to get to the point that we need it to be, where the sport it's on a even playing field, and everybody has the same advantages, so to speak.
You know why your guys' conversation is perfectly representative? Because this is exactly the conversation that happened in some boardroom at the UFC. Do we say nothing, or do we come out and say this? And a whole bunch of guys sit around and go, let's go with nothing. That's just how business works. They made that decision to do it. Which part of this are we surprised at? That Vitor was a juice bag? We're not surprised at that. Are we surprised that the UFC kind of used intimidation and bullying tactics in 2012? That was how they did business back then. None of this is really that big a surprise. And now in 2016, I see your point, Pollock, because if I was in that boardroom, I'd be saying, we should just go ahead and say, this was exactly like you said, this was a different time, it was weird, we hadn't yet got the controls that we have today. I'd have been on that team, but they decided in that room to go with your team.
I guarantee one of the guys that wasn't on that email that got these record results was John Jones, who probably had no idea about any of this, and he had to fight the guy a few weeks later in Toronto.
Yeah, I mean, a tiny bit more juice and that arm might have broke. You know, who knows? But it is weird to try to figure out what the strategy is. They're like, how do we handle this? I don't know. Let's just say nothing.
The reality is
that's a strategy.
Yeah, I get it. But the reality is there's no playbook. They can't look at history. Mixed martial arts is less than 20 years old, so they're trying to figure out the best plan to try to get people to change people's perspective on things, because not everybody is on board with the sport, and nobody needs to rehash the past of guys being on the sauce.
All right. With that, he is Robin Black. He is John Ramdeen. I'm John
Free Nick
Pollock.
Diaz.
We have more Fight News Now Extra, and it is coming up now.